Hi, everyone. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining today's webinar on unifying data for smarter schools we're running together with Microsoft. We are running a couple of minutes behind, but we will get things going now and catch up in time, hopefully. So thank you again for taking out the time today. I know everybody's busy and there are lots of things going on, so we appreciate you taking out the time from your busy day. My name is Sulabh Jain, and in my role here at Antares as the education lead, I work with education institutions all over the world on a daily basis to solve industry problems on the Microsoft platform. Many schools and education institutions nowadays are looking to leverage data for better, timely, and more transparent decision-making. However, schools face many challenges in managing that data effectively, ranging from data silos, issues with data quality, data privacy, and limited resources, of course. So today we have a unique opportunity to hear from Microsoft and our data and AI education industry expert to discuss how we can overcome some of these challenges. So the agenda today is very straightforward. I'll give you a quick introduction to Antares and our speakers shortly. Dan from Microsoft will then talk about the latest trends in data analytics, and Martin from Antares will talk about the importance of unifying data in schools and across schools, and how we can use this data to improve student engagement. Lastly, we'll reserve about 10 odd minutes for questions and answers in the end. During the presentation, you will be all on mute. So if you have any questions at any point, please type them in the chat. We will be taking questions in the end, like I said, before we close, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the call today. If we are not able to get to any of the questions today, we will connect with you individually by the end of the week to answer your questions. So to give you an introduction to Antares and the work we're doing in the education industry, I thought it would be great for you to know a few important things about us. We have over 15 years working experience in the education sector and have implemented wide-ranging solutions on the Microsoft platform that span across students, teachers, administrative staff, parents, and alumni. We have a culture of innovation and have a range of IP that we bring to the table when implementing solutions or looking to solve industry problems. We also work with Microsoft education and engineering teams on a number of initiatives together. We have a strategic partnership with the Centre for Change and Complexity and Learning with University of South Australia, which is one of the top EdTech research centres in the world. And they help schools solve complex problems in the areas of learning analytics and learning science to support planning, teaching, and learning. And lastly, we are part of an alliance called the Cloud Collective that provides end-to-end solutions on any of the three Microsoft Cloud, Dynamics, Azure, or M365. So now let me introduce you to our speakers today. First, meet Dan Bowen. Dan Bowen is a technology strategist for education at Microsoft. He has been working on data and AI projects for several years with his customers, as well as projects around security, collaboration, and cloud. And meet Martin Marek. Martin has a background in data science and specializes in working with education customers at Antares. Martin consults across the full data lifecycle, from integrating data sources, implementing open education analytics, to deploying machine learning models for deeper insights. So before we get into it, I'd like to do a quick poll to help everybody and our presenters get a good idea about where everyone is at in their data journey today. You should have a poll come up on your screen shortly with 3 quick questions, and if you could take 30 seconds to submit that would be great. So the questions are, how would you describe your experience with data management in your school? What is your school's current stage of data and AI maturity? And what are your school's priorities for data and AI initiatives in the next 12 months? Once you've completed the poll, you will be able to see everyone's aggregated results, and we will also provide these results to you. So I'll just give everybody another 10-15 seconds to complete the polls on your screen. The poll will remain open for the next 10 odd minutes, so you have plenty of time to complete it as we move further along in the presentation shortly. Just going to see if you can see the results coming through. And you should be able to click on view poll to be able to see the results in the chat as well. So we can see, based on the responses we have so far, a lot of you would describe your experience with data management as intermediate. The next question, we just go to the next question. So next question is, what is your school's current state of data and AI maturity? And about 38% of people are experimenting with data and AI, and the same number of people have said they're implementing data and AI in specific areas, which is great to see. And then the last one, what are your school's priorities for data and AI initiatives in the next 12 months? A lot of people is saying basically looking to improve student outcomes, which is terrific. All right, let's get into it then. I'll hand it over to you now, Dan, to talk about the latest trends in data analytics. And you're on mute, sorry.
Of course I am. Of course I'm on mute. Hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate that intro there. Sabia, I'm Dan. I work across education. There's a couple of my colleagues on the call today as well. Please reach out to anybody if you need any more information about what we shared today. So can you take through to the next slide, please, Slab? So what we're looking at from an education point of view at the minute, the three kind of mega trends. Security and privacy, moving to the cloud, but obviously the big one we're looking at today is big data and scaled analytics. So that's kind of one of the big things that we're looking at. You know, when we working with schools and asking them, you know, the things that they're interested in at the minute and where they want to go in terms of the direction. You know, there's a lot happening at the minute with things like OpenAI and ChatGPT and the like. So even people are thinking even more about artificial intelligence, big data, and cloud as we move forward. But underpinning all of that are the kind of stories that we need to kind of tease out from a school point of view. So if we go to the next slide there, Slab. You know, the stories we're looking at are really important here, right? We've got a lot of data in education. There's a lot of dispersed data in education. Education generally is like a bit of a cottage industry. We've got an LMS, we've got SIS data, we've got a whole heap of learning management tools in schools, and that data is disparate. So where are the stories there? I show you this, these next two slides. This one is to kind of illustrate $1 trillion, right? In US, you know, sometimes we bandy about these kind of remarks about, you know, $5 trillion here, you know, $30 trillion there, until you sort of visualize some of this data and bring it together, you can't see those stories. There's a great guy called David McCandless. He does a brilliant TED talk. Have a look at that. And it's sort of visualizing data that we wouldn't normally see. So this kind of connects the dots together and allows us to understand, you know, what $1 trillion actually means, right? So if you go to the next slide, Slab, this one, there's a little build out in a second, but this graph here, you know, what do you think this means from 2000 to 2017 here, right? What are these peaks and troughs that are happening, right? And this is about the kind of data that they use when they're looking at media news articles and the mentions that happen on social media, right? So when you start taking these and looking at this data, you can see certain things happen here, right? You know, obviously this is pre-COVID because the COVID news is kind of huge. So I kind of brought this down to 2017 here so you could see, but you can start to see trends when you zoom out. So for example, an interesting one here, when the people are looking at this data, the red mountains that you can see in there, that kind of occur at the same time each year. That was based on the timeline when the Columbine shooting happened in the US. So violent video games was kind of the topic of discussion around Call of Duty and things like that, right? So you can see trends when you kind of zoom out and look at patterns, and we see that in education a lot. When you can correlate things like students' connection with Microsoft Teams and some of the insight tools that they've got there, and their attendance data, or some of the deeper Catholic care data, for example, in the Catholic system. So when you start correlating multiple systems together, which Marty will talk about a little bit later, then you can start to get really meaningful insights. So next slide, Slab. So when we start to look at the things that are happening already inside AI, these are some examples very, very quickly. We've been using AI and data for quite some time. Top left there, Kakadu collecting data about magpie geese and the grass and the kind of areas that they kind of populate in the Kakadu area. We use drone technology and cameras to identify that, but we can crunch that data really, really quickly and identify things really fast here. This is Darwin Harbour here. There's also a project we're doing there which identifies fish stocks in Darwin Harbour. Because you can't get in the water in Darwin Harbour, obviously. The police, think about that one. That's similar to Edu. Because obviously, if you're catching criminals these days or looking for suspects, you've got to correlate, Wi-Fi data, WhatsApp data, their email data, mobile signals, a whole heap of stuff that you've got to correlate really, really quickly. And if you look at Netflix for any of these crime dramas these days, people put pins on things in a pegboard and correlate, where people are and what they're doing at the same time. You need to do that digitally these days when you're fighting crime. And similarly, we need to correlate these things together when we're actually thinking about students and their outcomes and maybe identifying students at risk and the like. Obviously, lots of data out there around sport and consumer-based technology. There's the NBA at the bottom right there. And we're doing a lot in education as well. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Keep building these out, Slab, for a minute. Lots of things we're doing in New South Wales, for example, in the Catholic system. We look at a lot of analytics and data projects, a lot of stuff in Maitland Newcastle diocese, for example. So lots of my accounts, predominantly in the Catholic sector. Out of all my accounts, I'd say about 75% have got data platforms up and running now, and are really thinking about exploiting those and unlocking that intelligence, right? So there's a big trend in people collating that data, ingesting data from different sources, and really trying to think about looking at insights more deeply now across their estate. So as we look at that, what's the architecture, right? And Marty's going to talk about this in a bit more detail, but just simplify it very quickly for you, right? You get data in, right? We've got tools like Azure Data Factory, for example, to bring that data in. And that could be on-prem data, cloud data, data from your SaaS products like Microsoft 365. You first of all got to collect that data and ingest it and put it in a way that's meaningful. Yeah, you can kind of transform that data and really make sure it's in a format that you need. And that's a lot of the work that our partners like Antares do, is kind of make sure that you've got lots of data sources. What do you need? And how can we make that most efficient and effective for you and get that into your data platform? Once you get it in, then you can analyze it. We got tools that you might hear of called Synapse and the like, and we can do some analytics in there. We can do machine learning in there, and that's where the fun stuff happens with AI, where you can correlate, patterns and all of that kind of stuff. Then you got to visualize that data through Power BI to your teachers, to your admin, or to your students and your parents. So there's a flow going on there, right? And then overlaying over the top of that, and this is where Marty's forte is as well, is a project that we've got together with some of our partners called Open Education Analytics. Now, what that does is, it's all very well. There's a lot of people doing BI projects at the minute. You get a CSV file in, you grab all your analytics, and you create a Power BI report about that. But when you start to correlate things like, for example, the Microsoft 365 data against that, which you can ingest into your data platform, then you get really interesting insights. And we've got this Open Education Analytics project, which a lot of our partners are working through with us, like Marty and the team at Antares, where we've got models that are already pre-built for you, to understand things like students at risk and well-being and the like, right? And we'll share a bit of that, and I'll put some links in the chat as we go through. But Open Education Analytics is like a community that we can all connect and share and support each other in this area, because even though we're unique at schools, we actually are trying to solve the same things in a lot of the time. So next slide, Slab. So that's the architecture of your kind of modern data warehouse, I suppose, ingestion, analytics, and then publishing. So let's think about that from a student point of view, right? This is very quick student view here, like in the day of the life of a student or a teacher. They're looking at, how many days this particular student's been absent, what behavior referrals have come in, any counselor referrals. Interestingly, there's a big flag here. That student's actually withdrawn from a soccer team. And then it's identifying some interventions as we go through, right? So it's not just only giving us that information, but it's recommending some interventions that need to kind of happen. So it's recommended that we temporarily adjust her workload, for example, because she's got quite a lot of stress on her plate at the minute. Her well-being's going down, her performance is dropping, and let's try to suggest something to do, right? So it's really thinking about students' workload, students' well-being, where they can kind of sit generally, holistically across the school, for example. So this is kind of building out that thought process as a teacher, updating a parent to say, hey, we've reducing workload on your son or daughter at the minute, or Sarah in this case, because we're realizing that she's struggling because of lots of indicators is happening. Obviously connecting these as well to the tools and technology you're used to, so being able to connect with the parent via your Microsoft Teams interface, via bot technology, and via Teams calling and the like as well, to kind of connect the dots there to kind of really support the holistic development of the students there. So it's very much an end-to-end story. Now, just before we go across Antares, right, just to kind of illustrate where we are with the analytics piece. So yes, we know how we get the information in now, right? We understand that we store it in the data warehouse, and we understand that we can do analytics on that. Now, there's 4 different types of analytics, yeah? So your descriptive analytics, which schools do really well at the minute, my daughter had a NAPLAN, a couple of weeks ago. This is like all in the past, yeah? This is what's happened. This is how Megan, my daughter's reading is over the last couple of months. This is where it was when she did the NAPLAN test. And then the teachers can unpack that and do more diagnostic analytics. So why was that, why did her results in a particular area dive or whatever? What can we do to kind of think about the plans we can put in place next year to support it, right? So it's all of the diagnostic and descriptive stuff that happens in schools at the minute. Once you've got your data together in an analytical platform, in a modern data warehouse, and you can put modern analytics to it, so then you can say, well, what can we do and what interventions can we do to actually predict what will happen? How will Megan perform, in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years with her reading and writing, for example? How will she perform in different subjects? And then how can we actually intervene to kind of fix that, to support her more? For example, we've seen results across Australia where there's one particular example when somebody rang me up, some data person in a school, and said that they realized that they had a really bad science cohort. They had bad results, right, or low results. And then actually that was a result based on their correlations of data on the literacy of the students, not their science teacher, not the science group they were in, but that group had low literacy. So if they would have intervened earlier on the literacy, they would have accessed that science coursework earlier. So it's about, where we are at the minute is analyzing grades and what caused those grades. And what we want to do is move forward and say, well, who is at risk, and what can we do about that to make their learning and their outcomes in schools better? So that's it from me. I'm looking forward to seeing how we can kind of work with you on this, because it is absolutely something that everybody at an individual school level should be working on. I'll pass across to Marty and Salab now. We're going to do another poll, I think, but a really keen to see you on this journey, and thanks for joining the call, and we're happy from a Microsoft point of view to help you in any way we can. Over to you, Salam.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that excellent overview on some of the latest trends we're seeing in data analytics. Much appreciate that. I'd now like to take a quick pause and ask you to reflect and answer this question on your screen. What are your biggest data management challenges in your school at the moment? Do you think it's data silos, data quality, data privacy? Is it limited resources you have, or something else, or all of the above? Feel free to submit your poll on that. It'll be great for us to all see what sort of issues everybody's having, so we can address this during the session as we go along. Excellent. Now, I'd like to hand over to Marty or Martin, more formally, to talk about his experiences in unifying data for schools and some of the key lessons he has learned. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Celeb. You're more than welcome to call me Marty. Some people even call me Marty McFly from Back to the Future, so completely fine. So as Celeb mentioned, I have a data science background, and my main interest is really how do we bring that technology and that those advanced analytics processes into our education sector. So my focus as Antares is to help our education customers to get to that goal. But there are a whole heap of barriers and challenges that prevent some independent schools, and if we work, or we work with government departments as well that look
Hello,
after
Mary
the
Lou
cohort.
speaking. Yes, it is.
Sorry.
So is there a question or?
I'm good, thank you. How are
I
you?
think somebody's off
Right.
mute. Let me just, it's
Okay.
Mary Lou, I think. Let me just, yeah.
That's fine. So,
Cool.
so yeah, so I work with our customers to try to understand where they are on that journey towards bettering their advanced analytics and help them along that journey. So I've been involved with the OEA for almost since the very beginning. And in that time, I've spoken to, many schools, independent schools, government departments, dioceses that look after 30, 60, 100 schools. And whether we're talking to an independent school or a diocese, there are some common themes that have emerged. And one of the main common themes that I'm finding is their desire to use data to get better insights and make better decisions, right? And as I mentioned, that there are some barriers to entry that prevent some from taking those steps. One of the main ones is there's been a big push for data and analytics, not just in the education sector, but in many other sectors as well, meaning that a lot of the data resources, data engineers, data experts are becoming very scarce. So that it's a very difficult resource to try and grab and utilize. And so you're kind of stuck between, okay, well, do I upskill or do I hire somebody? And either of those options can be quite difficult. The second one is there's been a big, as you're well aware, there's been a big push toward digitization over the past couple of decades. So a lot of the schools have adopted things like, as Dan mentioned, student management, learning management systems, finance systems, different kinds of systems that have emerged and have been implemented by schools. Some are new, some are old, right? But there's a mixture of different data silos that have appeared that really create a sort of disparate set of data sets that are difficult to merge and really handle as one and be able to correlate that data. To make it even worse, a lot of the data by teachers and by some facilitators are actually being captured manually. So I see a lot of Excel being used. I see a lot of manual data capture that isn't really even input into a system like a student management system, or there is no system that can handle that sort of data. One of the data sets that we often come across is behavioral data. If a student misbehaves or has some difficulty with behavior, how that data gets captured is a challenge. How that gets stored and obviously how we can analyze that data over the long term is again another challenge. Now, all of these challenges become even more problematic when you're talking about multiple schools, right? So if we're now talking about a diocese or a government department looking after many schools, the problem multiplies because a lot of the schools, even in these cohort situations, will have different kinds of systems. Now, over time, they kind of have unified some systems, like their student management portals and learning systems have been, centralized. But even in those cases, I come across a lot of scenarios where there is a handful of schools that still remain on different systems. And so as an administrative layer on top of this, it becomes very difficult to, again, centralize and manage and have an aggregate view of what is going on across the whole cohort. Next slide, please. So I guess the main question is, why do we even want to unify data, right? How is this going to help us? I think taking a step back for a minute, and for me, I'm very passionate about this topic, and I thought about this very deeply, and when you, depending on what you read, you'll find that there's probably a handful of societal groups, right? So things like your institutions, things like law enforcement, health, and education, of course. But I believe that education is perhaps one of the most important ones, because without education, we don't have any of the other ones. So it becomes crucial for anyone that's involved in education to try and get the best outcomes for our students. And why we want to unify data? Well, because it gets us better decision-making abilities at a holistic level, right? Whether you're an independent school, whether you're a cohort, better data and unified data gives us the correlation capability, and it gives us the ability to view things at a high level or at the detailed level from one central place, right? So to get to that, to get to that point, we need to identify who are the key stakeholders, right? So, we talk to principals, we talk to their curriculum advisors. Their job specifically is about reviewing what the curriculum should look like. And in a lot of the cases, what happens is these curriculum advisors will actually meet with teachers on a very, very regular basis. But the data they take to these meetings is a lot of the time manually handled, right? And in a lot of cases, teachers and curriculum advisors will have kind of different sets of data they both bring to the table to have these conversations with. And so you have this kind of disparate set of data sets that are coming together, have these conversations to try and identify, okay, what is the curriculum, or what are the interventions that we need to take to towards better student outcomes. And so not having this unified data means that they're spending a lot of time in manually handling these data silos. Now, looking at the challenges more specifically, we've sort of grouped this into three major groupings. The first one is, like I mentioned, this cohort. So if we're talking about, say, government department, education department, or a diocese where there are multiple schools being managed, one of the key challenges is that you have different schools with different data silos. And so you're trying to bring them together into a kind of unified report, but you have different data sets, you have a different data model in those data sets, so it becomes very difficult. And the other challenge there is the accuracy of the data that you're relying on, because a lot of the time the processes that are involved in actually capturing that data sometimes break down as well. I'll give you an example of that. So, there are student management systems where you input student IDs, you input their results, and et cetera, and et cetera. A lot of the times, teachers and curriculum advisors will want to input extra information, and so they use fields for different purposes, right? Because they want to capture information. Because sometimes that student management learning system doesn't actually cater for what they want to capture. So, when they do that, the data then becomes, different to what the view or the intention for that data set is. And so the accuracy of the data breaks down. And when you attempt to rely on that data, it becomes, well, as the old saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. The other challenge here is, the scale of having to manage multiple schools. So there might be challenges in things like connectivity in remote areas. There might be challenges with having, again, sort of different systems at different schools that you're trying to merge together to get an aggregate view. And whilst all this is happening, there's pressure for these overarching departments, whether it's a diocese or a government department, to prove their value, right? How do we provide value to these schools so they can get better student outcomes? The next group is, when we're looking at independent schools themselves, one of the key things for them is to provide, again, the best possible, say, intervention programs or the best possible curriculum based on how that student cohort is currently, or what they're currently achieving. So that might be a view across many, many years. A lot of schools will have this thing called early years data, where right from the very, early years of prep in grade 1 and grade 2, they do some testing to see where is that current cohort at. And then things like ACER and NAPLAN take over, and then you have this kind of multitude of testing steps along the way. But all of this data is captured and stored in different places, right? And so you have to kind of get into the NAPLAN portal, get some NAPLAN data. But what if you just want to view how is the student currently going? That's say in year 10. How has that student progressed over time? That takes a lot of manual work to put together different pieces of data, and so it becomes difficult for particularly teachers who are time poor and even principals that are time poor to really dive into that data as much as they would like. The other major one here is, of course, privacy. So how do we, from a data privacy and compliance perspective, how do we manage that data so only the people that have access to it have access, right? That becomes even more difficult in an environment where you have multiple silos and people kind of having to go out and capture data manually and then share it around. It becomes almost impossible to manage that from a compliance and privacy perspective. And so the third one, when we're talking about teachers, again, I mentioned the time and resource poor. Of course, they're not going to spend a lot of time in doing this data analysis. A lot of them aren't necessarily trained or are not data experts, which is more than understandable, although I have come across a few teachers that are very, very savvy from a data perspective. It's not their it's not their remit. It's something that they have to do to be able to become better teachers. But if they're not given the right resources, then they're spending a lot of time in manually having to do that, and that takes away from their ability to to focus on their students. So, having said all of this, what are some of the steps that we can take, no matter where you are in your data journey, to progress or take that next step? Now, over the course of the last couple of years, as I was speaking to different organisations, different schools, we've kind of grouped, again, we've kind of identified some common themes and we've grouped them into three different groupings. The first group are essentially organisations that haven't really done anything. Now, you've probably done something in terms of data analytics, but this really means you haven't started to think about an overall process and how you can start merging data sets together in a unified way and provide this kind of centralized model, right? So everybody does some, with Excel and some manual process, but this is more about haven't really identified a use case or haven't really identified an approach, or are hitting those barriers to entry that I was mentioning earlier. And so one of the easiest steps here is to really take a step back and start with what is it that you currently have. So what are my data sources? What do those data sources give me in terms of a data set that I can use or I can extract, right? So identify where these data sources are, what they are, and what your current processes are for capturing data. Because a lot of the time you'll find even inside an independent school, different teachers will have different processes for doing the same thing. And again, this is even worse when you have multiple schools doing the same thing with different processes. But identifying what those processes are, communicating that to the cohort and unifying those processes will enable you to create data sets that are more accurate. So that's really step number one, is identify what your data sources are and sort of try and clean them up via a better set of processes. Then we have group number two, and this is where a lot of independent schools are, is we have a use case. We know that this is important. We want to be able to implement something that will help us to create this kind of central view that teachers and curriculum advisors can use together to have better conversations. This is where the OEA comes in. Now, as I said, I've been working with OEA almost since the very beginning, and I've seen it kind of mature over the years into a very solid platform. But I think it's more than just a set of tools that allow you to create this centralized unification of data. It's actually a community of different cohorts that help each other to identify, okay, how can I do this, or how can I achieve that? Because it's an open source platform, anyone can contribute to it, and many schools do, and it's global. So you have different viewpoints, not just from Australia, but from a global perspective. We have meetings. So there are workshops where people get together and discuss, how do you tackle this problem? How did you report on that? What are some of the data engineering aspects that you need to be able to get to those reports? There are many, many conversations, but the net of it is the OEA isn't just a set of tools. It's a community of people that are all in education with a common purpose, right? And that is better student outcomes. And so you can leverage these conversations. You can leverage what other people have already done with OEA inside your own organization. And so if you do have a use case, and if you do want to move towards this unification of data and creating more intelligent reports, the OEA is a perfect place to start. Now, some people are already in that journey, right? So we have on the next slide, people that have already started but want to do more. So these are some of the people that we have worked with, or organizations we have worked with. The OEA is in place. It's providing a centralized dashboard. It's creating those better conversations internally between principal, curriculum advisors, and teachers. But they want to do more. So one of the things that we've come up with to help that process, and part of our process is, it's not just for us to implement the OEA. It's for us to actually to make the process by which you're capturing and using this data better, right? And part of that is implementing the OEA, but another big part of that is, how do we then transition, once that's implemented, how do we transition the management of that OEA and the management of that process so that an independent school can manage that independently, right? Pardon the pun, right? And so one of the key things that we've come up with here is providing something like a service catalog to that centralized IT department in that independent school, right? So this is partially technology, partially OEA, partially knowledge transfer, right? So it's about, how do we group these different data sets together in a way that makes sense, is logical. And I apologize for the small font there, but we have things like student demographics. If you look at the bottom left on the student intelligence, these are just some of the example groupings of what we can deliver as part of an almost templated approach, right, for delivering a dashboard, right? So if you're interested in student demographics and a kind of breakdown of, what's my current student demographics versus achievements in a dashboard, then you simply pick the services that you need from this service catalog. One would be student demographics. Maybe the other one is a national assessment. So that's the NAPLAN data, right? And you can merge those two together in a way that allows you very quick access and a view of what's the breakdown of achievement in demographic versus NAPLAN, right? Because then you can start talking about what are the best intervention programs where they are needed, and how do we tackle those problems? And that's just a simplified example. Of course, there are many other facets to that. But once you take that step, to have this kind of grouping of data sets, to have a kind of standardized approach that you can manage, and then you can roll out over time as pieces or modules, as the OEA calls it, helps immensely, because now you're moving away from this big bang approach where it's just too much, too difficult, takes too long, to starting with a small step, implementing something like the OEA, implementing small modules or small pieces over time, and moving towards that unified data model. That helps you then, again, get further insights into your students and ultimately drive better student outcomes. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic. I know it's a short webinar in this case, but always happy to take questions. I'm happy to take questions offline. have separate have separate conversations with anyone that's interested in this. So, but look, thank you very much for listening to me for the short time, and I'll hand back to you, Sulab.
Thanks, Marty, for sharing your experiences and insights. Very, very insightful as always. I appreciate that. So as a next step, if you are planning to do more with data in your school, I'd recommend that you start with the data assessment and establish what you would like to get out of your data. Maybe the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We've worked with many schools who want to do data projects but do not have an end goal in mind. And it is crucial that you do have that and you have a bit of a roadmap on where you want to be, so you can work towards that. You can get appropriate buy-in on the commitment, on the resources, investment required, etc., and then work towards that journey. So that's very, very important. If you do not have enough skills or resources to conduct these assessments within the school, we conduct many of these assessments, so we can definitely help as well. So please, if there was one thing that would like you to take out of this session today, is like, if you haven't already conducted so, please conduct a data assessment internally, and if need be, feel free to reach out to us to help out with that. Now, I'll open the floor for any questions, so please feel free to type away and ask any questions you have of Dan, Marty, or myself. So I'll start monitoring the chat now for any Q&As. But maybe just to get us started, Dan, question to you. How can schools leverage Microsoft tools and solutions to effectively manage their data and overcome data silos?
That's a great question, Slav. Thanks for that. And I know Marty highlighted a lot of that in his talk as well. I think you get a lot of metadata in the Microsoft platform, right? And we've seen a lot of people standardize now around like the one platform, the Microsoft platform. If you're using other LMSs and the like, you can connect those in, but I'd utilize the tools you've got, right? Get the value from those tools. So you can get insights. I've put in the chat window here. You can get insights on the classes your teachers are teaching at the minute already with the tools you've got without buying anything extra, right? So there's a lot of people add in extra tools and technologies to this, but you make sure you get value out of what you're using. Reach out to us directly at Microsoft. We've got teaching ambassadors who can help, like Amanda Frampton up in Queensland there, Andrew Balza in New South Wales, and Vic. So wherever you are, you've got a teaching and learning kind of lead that can support you in using those. So use those assets, I suppose, as best you can, really.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. It's great. Now, Marty, you talked about when you were sharing your experience, you talked about some of the challenges that school have when they modify the school management systems and some of the data quality issues that come with that. What are some of the best practices for ensuring data quality in the school data management system?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a critical step, and it's a critical early step to really building any platform that is going to provide a value, because if you don't have accurate data, then you're making decisions based on essentially what I said earlier around garbage in, garbage out. I think having actually worked through this problem a number of times, I think there are probably 3 key areas, and the first one is really good communication. So whether you're an independent school, whether you look after many schools, it's having a person that is accountable for the communication of what a process is and what are the right processes for everyone to use to capture and store data. Because oftentimes what happens is even if you have the one system that is being used to input student data, people use it, like I mentioned earlier, in different kinds of ways. And so over time that data gets messy, and it becomes difficult to kind of manage. So good communication around good, simplified, standardized processes is definitely key. The other one is, and this is something I've also implemented, is having regular data reviews, which means that you would take your data, if it's siloed in a student management system, take that data and actually review the accuracy and validate. Is it still accurate? Is it still up to date? Where are some of the errors? Sometimes what happens is some fields aren't input or input incorrectly. And these aren't picked up for many, many years. And so when you try to build a dashboard that relies on all of this data, you have these kind of discrepancies that pop up in that dashboard. So, it's only then that people go, oh, well, let's go back and try to fix that accuracy. Instead, you can set up these regular data reviews that, not weekly, maybe monthly or quarterly, where, somebody actually looks at the data for accuracy, fixes any problems. And so you've got an ongoing, you've got this ongoing accuracy, as well as the privacy enforcements that come with that as well. So you can obviously nominate who has access to what and review that on that sort of same data review, with that same data review process. So yeah, those are sort of some of the more common things that can help.
A good question from John. We have a document repository in a third-party system. We have staff mainly on A3 licenses, some cleaning, etc., and some on A1+. We're looking to move that into SharePoint, but need to be able to tag, label, and restrict access to certain documents depending on staff permissions. Is this doable? So it's very much doable, John, because SharePoint is a very flexible platform and allows you that access controls at very granular, very different levels, and obviously has a taxonomy layer that allows you to classify the documents, create content types, and create views, etc., on that sort of information. What I'd say is that we probably best we take it offline. I'll have a quick chat with you, John, to understand, what is the third-party system that we're moving from, how much work you've already done. But there's already tools available that we can bring to the table, and like Dan said, that can actually help us migrate that data, cleanse that data on the way. What we do probably need to work out is, you're moving from one house to the other. What does this new house look like? How many rooms, how many, the kitchen, etc. What does that layout look like? And so what do we need to change to make sure that your ability to search and find information is very good when you move to this new house? Obviously, this also has an element of change management and training. So I can discuss all of those aspects to you, but very, very, very possible. In fact, we do this day in, day out for many, many customers who are looking to migrate from one platform to the other. Many customers also looking to migrate from file shares these days to M365. So it's very much doable. Now, question for you, Dan. You gave some examples of the education institutions that have successfully implemented Microsoft solutions to improve student engagement and learning outcomes. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind delving a bit more deeper or sharing more examples, because I'm sure there's many people on the call would like to hear as many stories as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got lots of stories in this area, and look out for some case studies coming up as well. Some good ones recently, Maitland Newcastle Diocese that I work with quite a lot, have done some really good work on student retention, and they had correlations between the students in their particular schools and when the local area and the mines, because they're based in that Newcastle area and that kind of a Hunter Valley area where there's a lot of coal mining and stuff. They worked out some correlations between the jobs and the community and students staying on or going on to HSC. So they were able to kind of identify that there were areas when students are leaving school early and support students through that journey. Some are focusing on things like HSC results. So I know Parramatta have been doing a lot in that area where they're looking at, HSC results and predicting how well students are going to perform and where to intervene. And then others taking another tactic around well-being. So some, like Sydney Catholic Schools, looking at well-being data and trying to identify students at risk, where they can put interventions in around that. So there's a kind of lot of these examples. Some people have done, one of the Broken Bay Diocese are doing this project called Student on a Page, where it's one page where the leaders can go to see that students' details and demographics and kind of trends that are happening with them across all the different areas. So the world's your oyster with the data, but it's kind of, people do kind of land on the same stuff. They do start kind of focusing on results, HSC, and then also well-being. So they're the kind of main use cases that we see. But obviously there was a whole plethora of use cases that Marty shared there on his slide earlier on. But they some of the kind of that are local in the area, and happy to connect in with the OEA community that Marty was talking about as well. They do have community calls, and people do share what they're doing. So Tasmania recently, for example, connected their Canvas LMS data into the Open Education Analytics framework there. So they use Canvas to kind of, bring that data across into the analytics portal. So lots of people are doing things. And like you mentioned earlier on there as well in your last question, lots of people are now also looking at tools like Purview, which is a way to govern and control that data once it's in place in your data warehouse. So there's a lot of things. When we think about things coming up, there'll be a lot of connections in to the OpenAI tools, I'm sure, where you're seeing things start to be natural language with the LLM, generative AI models and the like. So there'll be a point where you can just ask questions like, how's the lab doing in education in the school system? So there'll be a lot of things like that to come as well. So lots of good practice, and looking forward to seeing what you schools on the call will do after this.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. And if anybody wants to discuss, go into a bit more detail about specific projects, case studies that have come out, etc., we are also more than happy to jump on a call with Dan and talk about that in more detail, so you can get a bit of an idea about how long these initiatives, etc., take, how they came about, and various things like that. Dan mentioned some of the work that's come out in the AI sort of space with large language models. We are doing quite a bit of work in that sort of space. We are into building a lot of applications which are AI based and integrated with Azure OpenAI and those kind of things. I think many of you might know about Qbot, that we build, and Qbot's now going through an upgrade, being integrated with Azure OpenAI, etc. So also more than happy to talk about that. In fact, I'm hoping to talk about that as a topic on its own, probably in the next webinar. So keep an eye on for that. Now, just moving along, we've got a couple of minutes left. Maybe Marty, question for you, based on your experience. How can we use data analytics to identify students who may be at risk at falling behind and provide more targeted interventions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's, on the top of mind for a lot of curriculum advisors and a lot of teachers. And, a lot of the discussions really are centered around this very concept of, well, how do we identify students at risk early rather than sort of be more reactive, right? Once it's too late. And, one of the things that I've done in the past around this was to try and identify what are the sort of leading factors that contribute to students falling behind. And so what we did was we looked at sort of senior outcomes data. So basically the ATAR and, the certifications and uni subjects that they were doing, and try to then correlate that back all the way to the beginning of that student's education to prep, and try and identify where, students that have poor outcomes, senior outcomes, can we correlate that back to, what can we correlate that back to? What are the factors that ultimately contribute to that? And interestingly, one of the things that came out of that was that the number one factor for a student being successful is consistency, right? Irrespective of that student's background, home status, right? Single parent, nuclear family, financial situation, demographics, all of these other factors. Sure, there are some contributing factors there, but the number one factor was consistency. And so if you can have a student that is performing confidently early on and continue to drive that confidence and that performance all the way through, then regardless of what happens to them in the later years, they will be successful. And so one of the key things that came out of that was, well, how do we provide a view, and I talked about this a little bit in the webinar, is providing that single view of performance or achievement, as we call it, across that student's life. And to do that, we have to merge together different data sources like the early years testing, the NAPLAN testing, the ACER testing, as well as the senior outcomes and the ADOE data all in the one place. So we can kind of graph and make predictions based on how they're currently traveling versus say things like demographics and behavior data to what we believe they're going to be in the next couple of years. And so if we see some correlation and some trends there that need that intervention, well, all of a sudden now we're kind of doing that in a predictive way, rather than coming up against a student who was doing really well last year, all of a sudden is doing really poorly this year, and we're trying to figure out why. So that's a kind of reactive approach. So I think one of the key things here to summarize that answer is to merge those data sets together in a central view, so you can make those kind of predictive models that allow you to get a really high level aggregate view of that student as a whole, instead of just, again, different pieces of data in different silos, and have a look at those independently.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that, Marty. Now I'm just conscious of time, so I know everybody's got other things to do. So I do thank you so much for coming to the session today. I hope you found it useful. Like I said, if there's anything you'd like to discuss in person, do let us know. You've got my email and contact details on the screen. More than happy to get on a call and chat that further. Massive thanks to Dan Bowen from Microsoft and Marty from Antares for presenting today. Thank you all again for joining and participating in today's session. Hope you have a wonderful day, and it's goodbye from myself. Chief.
Thanks, everyone.